season 1, we didn't have any major battles. We had a lot of little skirmishes and kind of one-on-one fights, but no major battles. There was supposed to be one, and we had to cut it pretty much at the last minute because we didn't have the money for it, we didn't have the time.
When the battle commences, you and your wildlings will be in the vanguard.
It didn't really hurt the story there, though. It is much fun and is as unique as it would have been to see a battle, and it wasn't really essential to the story. That's not true in the second season.
We all felt we had to have the battle. It's very complicated, it's very expensive, it demanded a lot of us, but we felt it was something we had to try to put on the screen.
From the beginning, we knew that the second season builds to Blackwater.
The whole story is about these various forces coming into conflict with each other and culminating in a battle sequence.
Blackwater was always what we were aiming for. It was always going to be the 9th episode. It's always going to be the episode that George scripted.
I knew going in that the Battle of the Blackwater Bay was going to be the most expensive episode of the season, and that it was potentially a budget buster no matter who wrote it.
This time we wanted to make sure we saved our money and saved the days in the calendar so we didn't lose the battle the way we did with the first season.
This was a big battle even in the books. You could spend $100 million on it to capture everything that's actually in the books. So how could we possibly get it on film?
George Martin's delivered a great script, expensive, ambitious, full of all the things that are so characteristic of his books. And our job was to try to figure out a way to get them on the screen. We have a wonderful director, Neil Marshall, who's an expert at these sort of things, and we're very, very lucky to have him.
When you're planning a battle, you have to do it very much like a general would, of trying to make sense of it, trying to make sense of the geography. What is the logic of this battle? Who's trying to achieve what? Where are they going? How are they going to do it? And it is a really complicated sequence. And we have to do 3 battles in the space of one. It starts out as a naval battle, and then there's kind of a beach landing, and then there's an assault on a castle. So it's a huge undertaking.
It was really a long process of iterations where we came up with a version and we talked to production, to Gemma, and to visual effects and our stunt team, even before Neil came on board the show, about how much set we would need to stage this and where we could stage it.
We started preparing for this project in March, and this episode 9 was one of the first things that was thrown up because it is a very complex piece of storytelling.
Building a functional ship set with an above decks and a below decks and the aft castle and the forecastle and all the pieces of a ship that you need to actually shoot men on board a ship, and that's an enormously expensive thing to do for a television show.
As you can see, we are on a large portion of the budget for the entire series on this. It's not too often that sets this big get made anymore. The detail is just absolutely amazing. It looks like it's been here 200 years.
The one ship they built is incredible. They did an amazing job. I just love walking on that ship and kind of just walking around it. It's just all looks so real. So that made our jobs a lot easier in terms of the storytelling, just because it feels like they're really on a ship when they're on a ship.
We looked at Viking ships, we looked at feluccas, we looked at galleons a lot. We went right through history. And then we sort of thought, now what do we want or what do we need?
We have one boat set, which is a full-size galleon. It's a massive thing, and it will be used as both Stannis' boat, Davos' boat, an abandoned barge once we take all the rigging off, and we film it from all different angles to get these new and different looks to it.
The design was kind of loosely based on a 14th century ship. We put the forecastle on to make a battleship out of it. They had the ballistas on the foredecks, added shields to it to try and make it a little more military.
We started off looking at the storyboard and figured out how do we build this boat. After a very short period of time, we realised we've got to build a whole boat.
You don't have to make it float, that's the only advantage.
We use the same methods as building a real timber boat. Timber, ribs, clad, the same way as you build a real boat.
It's been built on an exterior set, but up against 2 huge green screens. So that allows us to replace and rebuild all of the background, which allows us a little bit more freedom of camera positions and camera heights and camera cranes.
And it was important that visual effects were working with us because the ship can only be built to a certain size and they're going to have to take it on. We built the sails to a certain height so that we knew that when they were shooting on the decks, they could contain a lot of the shots within our set and not have to rely on visual effects. But then when you kind of pull back to the big shot, they would add in the sails to the full height and so forth.
We had to build an interior of Stannis' cabin on a gimbal.
Originally, Neil wanted to make use of the hold inside the rail deck. And the way we'd constructed the ship at that stage was just too difficult to give them enough space to shoot it down there.
We built one set where all of the sailors are downstairs, they're preparing for battle.
They're terrified, they've been sick.
Then they get the call to battle and come running up the stairs on the interior, and then they arrive on the exterior of our boat on the back lot and up onto deck.
There was a need to be able to have stuntmen in the water, on fire, dying, being shot with arrows. And naturally, shooting here in the quarry lake at night would have been too dangerous for that, because it gets very deep very quickly. So we proposed building a tank alongside the ship. So we built this tank and set the water depth 4 feet deep, and that gave them enough depth there for guys to jump into the water safely, for guys to be in the water and appearing to be drowning.
Which was a great help to be able to do it in a controlled environment alongside our ship build.
We made a fiberglass hull that we could put in upside down, and the guys could be hanging onto that. One of the great advantages of modern TV now is that with high definition, all the detail comes out. So we have to be very critical about what our finishes are like and the amount of detailing we put into things.
Almost everything works on this. You could almost take it to the sea and disappear off into the sunset. It's a complete joy, and as an actor, when you do have this level of detail, it just makes my job so much easier.
That's actually a boat. Like, that is a full-on boat. You hardly need to do any work whatsoever. Like the moment when arches run off from underneath, like all this thudding on the wood and everything, and they're all in their chainmail and they can make water flow over you and everything. It is absolutely every boy's dream.
Boats are actually relatively easy to build. The battlements were more of a challenge because the sheer acreages of finishes you have to try and achieve, and plaster departments and paint departments and all those things, people working together. I'll do a boat anytime.
When it came to building the battlement set, we've used a real section of water in a disused quarry that we built in.
We built at Macramorn, which is the same place where we built Castle Black.
It's been designed to fit in with the architecture that they're also filming over into Dubrovnik. There's certain battlements and turrets and various bits and pieces, so it'll seamlessly blend into one at the end of the day, but it's an impressive structure.
Early on we knew we would have to have some establishing shots to explain where things were in the battle, because it's at night and it's difficult to get an orientation of where things are happening. So we created a pre-visualization of the battle actually early on before we went out to shoot it.
We could sort of see it as it would look eventually on screen in a very primitive form and decide if that was working. So the preview was very helpful. We have an insanely good VFX department this season, and they outdid themselves with this episode.
We had a rough idea which angles we would need and what we wanted to show for how long and where we'd have to help with visual effects.
Reiner will be putting in, King's Landing and the Red Keep and all this sort of thing sort of in the distance. But we're hoping that, again, the night's going to be really on our side. And so there'll be places where you can do a lot of shooting without having to always visual effect.
It just really puts you in the setting just perfectly of the scene. But when you walk in, it's surprisingly big. And then obviously when you get up, you can see the battlements and the archers' points. So it feels like a proper castle.
I've just walked on, but this is big enough to believe that it's the real thing.
And by the nature of having battlements, we had to put surfaces high up, which was great because then you have a chance to kind of shoot down and shoot up into it. So it was great fun to kind of design a space that had a lot of kind of potential for angles and looking through spaces into other areas.
We've got the towers, we can get at it. We've got the inside, all the preparation areas. We've got 2 turrets with braziers coming up above. So when they're shooting really sort of oblique shots, we can actually look down into the water. So it's a really, really good spot.
When we finish the main construction of the set, then set decorating come in with all their dressing, and then we come back in again and do a lot of aging on top of the dressing, and where we've got our torches on the wall, have the burn marks going up in the proper places. So it takes many layers to get there.
This is the moment where you sit back and say, well, yeah, it looks good, it's perfect, or as perfect as you can make it. You can always improve it, but it's perfect you make it on the day they're going to come and shoot.
Pretty early on, we were talking with the VFX team about this episode, which is going to be by far the most VFX heavy of the season, and we'd be much more likely to pull off what we wanted to pull off if it was nighttime, because in the broad daylight you're going to see everything, and so much of it would have to be CG, whereas in the darkness, darkness hides your sins. better.
It was a production decision, but was also an aesthetic decision. Since there was such a strong fire element, both with the wildfire and how the fire plays into the Hound's storyline and leads him to vacate the premises, which leads Joffrey to vacate the premises, which leads Tyrion to be the last man standing to lead them into battle. I mean, there are psychological implications to these physical production elements, and of course, fire at night is going to be a lot more impressive than fire during the day.
The entire thing is set at night, so the whole shoot is a night shoot. You know, even the studio stuff we're doing is a night shoot just to keep the crew on the same kind of timelines and such like, so avoid any kind of jet lag.
You can get a sense on the set here. It's the work is being done. It's being done incredibly quickly, but there's a wonderful atmosphere on set. Morale is incredible.
I think it adds a level of realism to the whole thing. As Peter, I think, has said many times, he didn't need to pretend to be like dirty and cold and tired. He was dirty and cold and tired.
Really tough on the crew, though, to have a month straight of night shoots, standing out there in the rain for weeks on end. 3 in the morning, Belfast in October is not always the best time to be outside for 10 hours in a row. It was very cold and very wet and not always the most pleasant, but there was such a sense of excitement and fun about the whole thing. It just felt right, and it ended up looking great.
There are lots of things in the book that we loved. The wildfire element of the battle and Tyrion's maneuverings to bring that new game-changing element into play.
This season he actually gets to fight the battle. He didn't get to fight in season 1.
That was the heart of it for us, so we knew we needed that. And to really sell that and to make that work, we needed a sea battle.
So for the many shots with ships, with the fleet approaching King's Landing, we had a layout of how we wanted to use the ship that was built in front of a green screen and how we're going to have then different setups with this specific set build that we could use in the sequence.
The ship is going to be reproduced and then turned into a CG model that will be multiplied many times to create Stannis's and Davos's fleet.
We wanted the 3D ships that we would add in the distance to look similar to the ship in the foreground. And we also knew we would have to extend the set ship in some of the shots. We also had to put it in CG water. It was built on land and we would have to put some water around it. For the CG fleet, we created duplicates of the foreground model with slight variations in it. Then we created this layout of Stannis's attacking fleet. Davos's ship is right at the beginning and Stannis's ship is in the center of it.
Well, with the fire ship and the leaking out, there was a shot showing the stern of the ship passing Davos's ship. It was going to be a combination of a small set build for us and a CGI shot.
There's one shot looking up at the main ship, and in the foreground there's this barge going past which is pouring out wildfire. And it was always planned to be a visual effects shot, and I came into that one and I said, well, why don't we just do this as a foreground miniature and we can do the whole thing in camera and not have visual effects for it.
So we came with the idea of actually kind of putting the whole rig on wheels for him so that we could easily position it so you can get the right angle on it in the proper position. And then because we had it there, it seemed like a good idea, maybe put it on rails and have it moving through the shot.
What we used there was we had a tank in the back, we had 3 outlets, and we had a liquid in there that we made up, and we had a fluorescent dye in it. So we had that coming out in the back of the ship. There was an ultraviolet light hidden behind the rudder of the ship, just so it would make the green liquid really kick.
It was one of those kind of stopgap solutions that turned into a better shot in the end.
Wherever possible, if I can, I'd much rather do stuff in camera, and I'd rather spend the visual effects budget on the really big stuff that we can never do in camera.
Wildfire. When we're going to create the explosion and the wildfire, we're going to use fire setups that we have worked with in the past, and we're going to enhance on that and changing the color, changing the character of the fire and the explosion to make it look like something slightly different, something more magical, something that has the power, the force to take out that amount of ships.
The big explosions could not be done in camera because we didn't have that much dynamite. We just, it was impossible to pull off.
We went through a bit of an R&D process. How should the wildfire look? How luminous should it be? How much green? We looked at some napalm explosions. We thought that was the kind of fiery energy that we wanted there. And there we also see these tentacles coming out of the core of the explosion. The flames also have to have a certain coloring and a certain quality and a certain height. We want to have a lot of spectacle, and we want to show a little bit of a magical element in the wildfire.
The explosion of the Hulk is a combination of a lot of different visual effects tricks.
The explosion is created in a CG world, but the effect of it we're trying to create for real. So we're trying to give the impression of what's really happening on the boat.
The plan is that we're working with a lot of special effects for the medium and close shots on the explosion. Stuart is going to plan to blow some things up there on the ship. Real things, real debris.